Hi, I'm John Oakes. This is part 4 in our series on Daniel. We're going to be looking in this video on Daniel chapter 4. And now remember, what we're doing in the first part of our series is Daniel chapters 1, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And these are the practical stories about Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And they're being tested by all kinds of forces outside of themselves to see if they're going to be faithful to God or not. And of course, they understand that God rules the nations. And because they know that God rules the nations, they believe God's in control. And we're seeing, as we already have in Daniel 1 and 3, that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are going to stay faithful. Now, the story here is in Daniel chapter 4. It's interesting because in Daniel chapter 4, the narrator is not Daniel or Shadrach, Meshach, or Abednego. It's actually Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, not that different from his dream in chapter 2 that we haven't covered yet. And this is a dream of a huge tree. We'll read it in a minute. But what's interesting is, because of this dream, Daniel came to actually believe in Jehovah. In Daniel 1, he was impressed with Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel, but, and then he had this vision that Daniel interpreted, and he began to say, hey, Jehovah is real. But then in Daniel chapter 3, it's not so great. He's kind of going to kill the Jews. But then because of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Nebuchadnezzar begins to give glory to God. That's pretty cool. Now, when we get to Daniel chapter 4, we're going to see, he's kind of backing off at this. But at the end of this chapter, Nebuchadnezzar is going to give glory to the God of Israel. It's kind of a great story. So now here's the background. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and the dream is of a massive tree. Now he knew this dream was from God. It was just that sort of dream. He's like, this is from God, or the gods, or whatever. So he calls in his astrologers and magicians and says, hey guys, tell me what the dream's about. Now, because of Daniel chapter 2, they're aware that Nebuchadnezzar is not going to put up with some sort of religious fakey thing. So they're wise. They say, hey, we don't know. So Nebuchadnezzar pulls in Daniel, the one who would interpret the dream in chapter 2. And let's see what happens starting in verse 9. I said, now when he says I said, this is Nebuchadnezzar. I said, Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery is too difficult for you. Here's my dream, interpret it for me. These are the visions I saw while lying in bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong. Its top touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it, the wild animals found shelter. The birds lived in its branches. From every creature it was fed. In the vision I saw while lying in bed, I looked, and there before me was a holy one, a messenger, coming down from heaven. He cried in a loud voice, cut down the tree, trim off its branches, strip off its leaves, scatter its fruit, but let the animals flee from under it and the birds from its branches. But let the stump and its roots bound with iron and bronze remain in the ground and the grass of the field. Let him be drenched. Him, who's him? Him, by the way, is Nebuchadnezzar. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal, till 7 times pass by for him. Now, maybe as you heard this story, you were already kind of guessing. Massive tree, all the people flock to it and taking care of it. It's a prophecy about Nebuchadnezzar and about the kingdom of Babylon. All right, and it's in a sense true. I mean, Babylon was the chief of the nations at that time, and everybody flocked. It was doing great, but God says, cut it down. And then he says, around the stump put some bronze. What's that about? Well, Daniel's going to give the interpretation, but I'll give you it right now. Basically, what it means is take away his kingdom, take away his empire, but keep him alive, essentially. Now let's read Daniel interpreting the dream. We'll skip down to verse 19. Then Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, was greatly perplexed for a time when he heard about the dream, and his thoughts terrified him. So the king said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its meaning alarm you. Belteshazzar, Daniel answered, "My lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies and its meaning to your adversaries. The tree you saw, which grew large and strong with its top touching the sky, visible to the whole earth, with beautiful leaves and abundant fruit, providing food for all, giving shelter to the wild animals, and having nesting places in the branches for the birds. Your Majesty, you are that tree. You have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown until it reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to the distant parts of the earth." Awesome! "Your Majesty saw a holy one, a messenger coming down from heaven and saying, 'Cut down the tree, destroy it, but leave the stump bound with iron and bronze in the grass of the field, while its root remains in the ground. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let him live with the wild animals until 7 times pass by for him. This is the interpretation, Your Majesty, and this is the decree the Most High has issued against my lord the king. You'll be driven away from the people and will live with the wild animals. You'll eat grass like the ox and be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 times will pass for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms.'" Anyway, as a result of this prophecy, Nebuchadnezzar says, "Amen. I'm gonna acknowledge Jehovah. I'm gonna do the right thing." Out of fear and out of recognizing that God is who he said he is, Nebuchadnezzar says, "Hey, I'm gonna humble myself." But we have to be careful. A lot of times we meet people, they've had religious experiences, maybe they've had, a prayer that came through or something. People come and they're suddenly open, but sometimes we need to be a little bit skeptical. A lot of times it's shallow. It's kind of like the parable of the seeds. And these are the seeds that fall among the rocky soil. They come up, but as soon as the sun comes out, they wither and they die. Unfortunately, that's Nebuchadnezzar in this case. So what happened was, it's a few months later, and it's like, God's awesome, but so am I. I'm actually pretty awesome too. I'm pretty amazing. And he kind of forgot. So let's read what happened to our friend Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 20. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he said, "Is this not this great Babylon I built as the royal residence for my majesty and for the glory of my majesty?" Even as the words were on his lips, a voice came from heaven. "This is what is declared for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. You'll be driven away from the people and will live with the wild animals. You'll eat grass like the ox. 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all the kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he pleases." Immediately what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from the people and ate grass like ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. Nebuchadnezzar's pride is pretty blatant. This awesome Babylon that I built to my glory is because of my majesty. Ouch. Who gave Nebuchadnezzar the kingdom? God gave Nebuchadnezzar the kingdom. In fact, we know that from Isaiah 39, where it's prophesied 200 years beforehand that that's exactly what's going to happen. Actually, 150 years. And then it happens. Nebuchadnezzar made a big mistake. But we would never be like Nebuchadnezzar. We would never say, "Oh, this awesome Bible talk, I've been doing a great job. God has really been using me. Our church, we are God's people, man. We have planted churches all around the world. We're amazing. Look at us. Look how great we are. Man, I've really changed my life. God has really done great things. I'm doing a great job. I am so grateful that God has made me to what I am today." Ouch. Let's read 1 Corinthians 4:7, which I think addresses this heart and attitude. Again, I don't think we'd be quite so blatant as our friend Nebuchadnezzar. Me, I, awesome me, awesome I. All right, but I think in some subtle ways we could be very much like Nebuchadnezzar. It says, "For who makes you different from anyone else? What do you have that you did not receive? And if you received it, why do you boast as though you did not?" Think about it. Think about it. What do you have? You have your life. Who gave you your life? You have your spouse, if you have one, your children. You have your salvation. I mean, every single good thing that we have because of God. So here's the question. Are we going to take credit, or are we going to give God the credit? Do I have anything that did not come from God? Absolutely. My pride, my selfishness, my greed, my lust. But everything that I value, every single thing that I value, and I believe every single thing you value, it comes from the Lord, not from you. I believe there are two ways for God to humble us. And that's what this message is about. That's what this lesson is about. The question is, are you going to give glory to God? Are you going to say, God rules the nations? Are you going to say, God is in control? Or are you going to say, I'm in control? There are two ways that God can humble you. One way God can humble you is by giving you amazing blessings. So you go, I am unworthy. I am so thankful. But what if you become prideful? The other way God has to humble you is by taking it all away. And that's what he did to Nebuchadnezzar. 7 years. This guy Nebuchadnezzar was so stubborn. 7 years. For 7 years. I believe what happened is probably there was a royal garden. In fact, his gardens are famous. Probably they just sort of, he went crazy. Clearly he went crazy. Probably what happened is his officials, they didn't want to admit it, so they just kind of put him in that area. He's kind of walking around, kind of like the ultimate crazy person, maybe like somebody who's not all together, is a homeless person. His hair grows long, he's dirty, his fingernails, for 7 years. By the way, there's precedent for this in history. King George III of England, he ruled for about 40 years, but for the last 20, 25 years, the guy was just basically crazy. But his ministers, if they admitted that he was crazy, there'd be a new king. So what they did was they kind of propped him every couple of years. They'd bring him in, put him in a chair, kind of have him sort of not say too much, and then they'd kind of set him aside because he was crazy. I think that's what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. Probably his ministers ruled in his place, and there's even some historical evidence to back this up, by the way. So his ministers ruled in his place, but Nebuchadnezzar lost everything. And again, there's two ways God could humble you. By blessing you, or by taking it all away. Which do you pick? Are you going to give credit? When your coworkers say, wow, you're amazing. Now, I don't think we need to get all religious, glory to God, whatever. But the bottom line is we need to give glory to God. Now let's see how this story ends. It's got a great ending. Oops, got to go back to Daniel 4, right? I'm in 1 Corinthians chapter 4. Here we go. Daniel. The story has a great ending. Now remember, in this story, the narrator is not Daniel, it's not Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It's actually our good friend Nebuchadnezzar. All right. Let me see. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar, as you know. Now at the end of that time, verse 34, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eye towards heaven. My sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases, and with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, what have you done? At the same time, my sanity is restored. My honor and splendor were returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My advisors and nobles sought me out, and I was restored to my throne and became even greater than before. But listen to the changed Nebuchadnezzar. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and exalt and glorify the King of heaven, because everything he does is right, and all his ways are just. And those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. One thing that makes Daniel unique is he was a prophet, but he was a prophet to the Gentiles. There's actually one other prophet whose main ministry was to the Gentiles. That was Jonah. I think it's pretty awesome. Apparently, Nebuchadnezzar became a worshiper of Jehovah. Now, did he abandon all the other Babylonian gods? I kind of suspect his conversion was not complete. But we're going to see later on in another prophecy about Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel chapter 7 that essentially his heart became a heart for God. That is awesome. But that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is this. Do you give credit to God? There are two ways God can humble you. He can give you great blessings. That's his choice. It's a better choice. But the problem is, then you have to acknowledge him. We have to give glory to God. He deserves all the credit. But on the other hand, those who walk in pride, it says here he's able to humble. I'd say for us as Christians, those who walk in pride, he will humble. Because he disciplines those he loves. Who's God going to go after? First, he's going to go after us. So I'm telling you right now, if you're going to give glory to yourself, to your church, to your leaders, or anybody other than God, be careful, because God might take it away. Because he doesn't love you? No, because he does love you. But he knows that you must be humble, because God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble. Thank you. All right, let's see if that one worked. Hopefully it did.